Welcome, 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 everyone. We are so excited today because we have Clay Malcolm here who is going to speak about IRAs and how important IRAs are to your wealth. You are going to hear about the things that are super important, all that what you can do and what you cannot do, and crossing that line can be disastrous. So please pay attention to what he is about to say. Cliff, would you please do an introduction to Clay Malcolm?
We are so excited and grateful that Clay Malcolm, CISP, is a guest on our show today. And we'll be covering topics that many of you may already be familiar with, and some of you might think you know, but maybe not quite correctly. As a certified IRA service professional, Clay is fully qualified to go over the benefits of qualified funds, self-directed IRAs, Roths, health savings accounts, and how they can help you grow your personal wealth. With that, I'm going to turn that over to Clay Malcolm.
Thanks, Cliff and Peggy. I'm delighted to be here and glad to see everybody. Hope I can give you some information that'll be helpful for you. And I'd love for this knowledge base to be, functional for you guys. So if you have questions, let's tackle those. And I'm going to try to give you the basics so that you have a sense of how to, put it in your thought process and see when it becomes the right tool for what you're doing. So a little about me. I've been doing self-directed IRA and HSA investing myself for about 12 years. I was also in the business for about 12 years. I'm not at the moment, but I'm certainly still involved in what's going on in terms of the legislation and the rules and the legislation that may be coming and that kind of stuff. So I'm up to date on all those kinds of things. So happy to be a resource for you today. Anything that I am giving you in terms of information today is education purposes only. I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney, and I'm not here to give you tax, legal, or investment advice. But I am here to share some information that, again, hopefully can become one of the tools in terms of your investment strategy. And with that, I will go ahead and launch into it. So the basic core idea here is that the tax advantaged accounts that you may have, so we'll talk about what those are here in a second, but generally people are thinking of it in terms of an IRA or a 401k. In a lot of cases, that tax advantaged money can be a real estate investor and can use the strategy that you choose. And that's how your account makes money. So a lot of us are familiar with 401ks and IRAs. We make contributions and it buys stocks and bonds and mutual funds and ETFs and things like that. So publicly traded securities, and that's all fine. But you have a wider range of choices than that. You can invest in hard assets like real estate or private equity type assets like in a syndication, a real estate syndication, something like that. You can make loans that have real estate as collateral or that are involved in a real estate investment deal. So real estate is one of the core quote unquote alternative assets that people will invest in using their tax advantage money. And the key to that statement really is the tax advantage part, right? So anybody who is trying to accumulate wealth will, benefit from this idea of the account with its tax advantages being the investor, because if you make 20 grand or 200 grand or whatever it is on a particular investment, all of that money comes back into your tax advantaged account without being taxed and can then be redeployed for the next investment, right? So when I invest personally, and I make a capital gain, I either have to do a 1031 exchange to push that tax down the road or some other vehicle, or in most cases, I have to pay some tax on what I've just gained. And that means that in the next deal, I have less money to invest. And so the compounding effect is less in my personal funds than it is in a tax advantaged account, because I get to redeploy all that money. It gets to keep growing and become kind of that big snowball effect. So the key to it, just, in terms of if it's new to you, the IRS does not say to all IRA custodians, you have to handle every asset that's allowed by law. So every IRA custodian, whether it's Schwab or Fidelity or your bank or a self-directed IRA company like I used to work for Advanta IRA, They all are qualified custodians for your IRA, but the custodian is actually the entity that chooses which assets they handle. So a Schwab or a Fidelity or a bank is going to say, hey, we'll be the custodian for your IRA. But while your IRA is with us, it can only invest in the things that we sell, usually publicly traded securities. Whereas if you go to a self-directed IRA company that specializes in alternative assets, they usually don't handle publicly traded securities or don't do them very well. And so what you're going there to do is to invest in these alternatives. You know, again, real estate's a very popular asset class. And you can have multiple IRAs operating simultaneously. You can actually have as many as you want. So it's very common for somebody to have an IRA at a Schwab or a Fidelity or a bank, and that's where their publicly traded securities are. And then they have an IRA at a self-directed IRA provider that handles real estate or whatever alternative you want to get into, whether it's cryptocurrency or precious metals or whatever it is. So you do have some flexibility in terms of where you deploy that money. And I'll just touch on that real briefly before we get into some of the just kind of the nuts and bolts things. I encourage everybody to take an inventory of their tax advantaged accounts. So any IRA that you have, whether it's traditional or Roth, any 401ks or 403bs, 401a, thrift savings plan, defined benefit plan, defined contribution plans, any of those retirement plans that have some tax advantages, make sure that you know where they are and how they're performing. And a lot of us who have had multiple jobs, it's not terribly difficult to forget that you have one somewhere or that you have stopped kind of paying attention to. I know that, you know, I'm in my mid 50s. And so I grew up thinking that these accounts were very autopilot, right? I didn't have to pay attention to them. But when you're doing self-directed IRAs, you really do have to, you know, put some attention toward it and think about what you're doing. And the first bit of attention that I encourage everybody to do is take an inventory of what you have. And because you can, in a lot of cases, perform a rollover or a transfer between accounts. So you can consolidate them, move them to a different custodian if you want to get into a different investment class or asset class as an investment. So you do have some options. So finding out what you have first is usually a great idea, and finding out which things can be consolidated. And usually these transfers and rollovers done properly, there's no tax and there's no penalty, right? You're just moving it from one kind of custodied account to another. So understand that you have some options, and it's a good idea to find out what you have and how to think about redeploying that. Okay, so now going back to our main point, which is that these tax advantage accounts can be investors in alternative assets. The account types that I'm kind of talking about today are individual accounts. So that's a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, and an HSA. So that's health savings account. Now, not everybody is qualified to open an HSA. Not everybody is actually qualified to make contributions to a traditional or Roth or in a given tax year. But looking into those accounts, because they are available to a lot of us, looking into those individual accounts is important. And all of those account types, again, traditional IRA, Roth IRA, and health savings account, can be a real estate investor. And that could be buying physical property, buying into a real estate syndication, using a debt instrument. So maybe your IRA or your HSA is a lender. And I will say that I have multiple Roths, multiple traditionals, multiple HSAs. I got a little carried away because I was in the business and it was very easy for me to open accounts. But I personally have, you know, my HSA and my IRA have been lenders. I've participated in a number of real estate syndications. One of my IRAs owned a physical single family rental property. I continue to own raw land, agriculture. So this happens to be trees. So all kinds of real estate investments that I've done inside my IRA. And again, the benefit for me is that those returns, when they come back, they're not taxed, so I can keep redeploying them and hopefully grow that money faster. So those are the individual accounts. So again, as part of your inventory, if you have traditional IRA, Roth IRA, or HSA, important to know. Employer accounts are slightly different in as much as they have to be sponsored by an employment entity, some sort of employer. So usually that's a job that you had, and they offer either a 401k, or there's a lot of other letters and numbers, as I mentioned before, 401a, 403b, 457. All these kind of tax advantaged accounts are usually offerings from an employer to help you save for retirement. And so they are tied to that employer to some extent, and that extent varies depending upon the account type and what you have going on. So learning about the details of how mobile that money is important. Then there are also IRAs that can be employer accounts. So there's a SEP IRA, SEP, and a simple, SIMPLE. So those are two IRA accounts that are employer driven as well. Now, again, a lot of these accounts have the ability to be moved around. Some of them, there's a time element to them. With 401ks, often you have to have separated from employment. That's not always the case. So there are a lot of rules that it's, again, as part of this inventory, you might want to, especially for these employer accounts, look at what the rules are for when that money can be transferred or rolled over without tax and without penalty. So those are the accounts. All those account types can invest in real estate. So and you can use the investment strategy that you already have researched and are using with your personal funds. One of the things that I did was I just took this was in the days of kind of my first single family real estate project. I just took the same kind of cast of characters and what I was doing with my personal investment funds, and I just did it in my IRA. And the reason I say it that way is because an IRA is its own legal and financial entity, and it is separate from your personal finances. So you are going to notice that the IRA, even though you control it, you get to make all the decisions about it. It does operate as its own separate kind of financial and legal entity, right? It has its own tax ID number, has its own bank accounts, has its own name. So all of that is going to be a little bit different. So you can almost think of it as a remote control investor that you have. It has some tax benefits and all that kind of stuff, but it is separate from your personal finances. Now, that's not to say that there can't be some interaction, but for more detail about that, ask a question, or we can handle that at a different time. So we have these accounts. The money that's in there can oftentimes be moved into position so that it can invest in real estate. And the real estate strategy that you've already learned, or that you're talking to Cliff and Peggy about, or just that you're coming to understand, can be that strategy can be used to deploy that money that's in your account. Again, you do have to have the right custodian, and there are some rules. So let me cover the rules just in a really brief flyby, and then we'll kind of move into one or two more points and then get to questions. Every IRA and 401k or account has a set of people called disqualified persons. That's the account holder and generally speaking, the account holder and their spouse, ascendants and descendants, and the descendant spouses. Also any fiduciary that's attached to the plan. But so any of those people are going to have some restrictions. Their personal funds, as well as any entity that they own or control, is going to have some restrictions in terms of the way that it interacts with your IRA funds or your tax advantaged account funds. So understand that there are some prohibited transactions. Most of them are attached to the idea of these disqualified persons. So a very limited number of family members, your IRA is going to have some restriction there. So it's important to look into that. And the prohibited transactions are really just, again, mostly they're tied to those things, those persons, whether they own or control the asset or things like that, or they're having an active participation. That sometimes rules it out. So for instance, my IRA can't buy a rental property that I already personally own because I'm a disqualified person. So there are things like that that are kind of rudimentary rules. It's good to find out exactly what they are. Okay, so we have the account types. That money can be deployed in any number of real estate assets or alternative assets. There are some rules about disqualified persons and some prohibited transactions. We talked a little bit about the mobility of those funds. So, your old 401k, for instance, might be easily rolled over into your traditional IRA. And your traditional IRA at Schwab or Fidelity, you might choose to take half of that and roll it over to or transfer it over to a self-directed IRA custodian so that you can invest in real estate. You could transfer all of it. You're in total control of how much you deploy at the different custodians. But there is some mobility there. And then the last point that I'll just make before we open it up for questions is just, the rules for, and a lot of them are Department of Labor. This all started with ERISA in the 1970s. Department of Labor and the IRS, of course, is kind of the watchdog for all this stuff. They don't change very fast typically. Historically, they've changed incredibly slowly. In the last couple of years, there's actually been more activity with IRA rules than there has been probably in the past 25, 30 years. So it is important to have a source of information. Usually that's your CPA about what's going on in those changes. But self-directed IRA providers are generally very good about keeping you informed about the rules and things like that. So if you are going to get a custodian that's a self-directed IRA custodian for your IRA investment, get one that's good at education. And since I work there, so I know this is true. Advantage IRA's education is very good. But you want to have an information source. And part of the reason that I say this is because right now, and this hasn't changed yet, and it might not for a long time, but who knows, you have the ability to make a traditional to Roth conversion of as much money as you want. And so, traditional IRA or 401k money is pre-tax money and then taxed on the way out. Roth is obviously post-tax money, and then it's not taxed on the way out. Again, as long as you follow the rules and that kind of thing. But you can actually switch vehicles depending upon whether that's a good financial decision for you or a good tax decision for you midstream. And so at the moment, you're allowed to convert as much or as little as you want from traditional IRA tax format to the Roth IRA tax format. And the reason I say this is because, whatever, thoughts you may have about the politics involved, personal income tax rates are, from a historical perspective, relatively low. And so, that's different for everybody. So I don't mean to, throw everybody in the same bin, but thinking about whether you should make a conversion of your traditional IRA money to Roth IRA money is a great conversation for you to have with your CPA or your enrolled agent or whoever your tax team is. And thinking about it every year is a good idea because at the moment you have a lot of flexibility there, and it may make a difference in terms of the overall taxation for your investment sequence. And so I throw that IRA conversion rule out there as one, an example of legislation and where it is on any given day, and two, that it's a tool that you might want to think about employing and looking into so that you have that at the ready. All right. Whew. I tried to stay in my time limit.
I think you did it.
All right.
I have a whole bunch of questions for you.
Me too.
All right, lay them on me.
Okay, so I would like you to, if you wouldn't mind, you said HSA, but I don't know if people know what that is. So I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit. And then my understanding is you can't open a Roth if you make a certain amount of money. So would you go over that? Once you have the Roth, my understanding is you could roll everything into it that you want, no matter how much money you make. But in order to open one, you're limited in your income. I don't know why that is, but whatever. Yeah, so could you answer those two questions?
Sure. So an HSA or health savings account is it's an incredible tax vehicle. It's as close to free money as you're ever going to get. However, there are some stipulations to who can have one. So your primary healthcare coverage has to be a high deductible health plan. That's relatively common these days. You can't be on Medicare and you can't be a dependent. If you meet those criteria, you're allowed to open a health savings account. And again, it is an individual custodial account. It operates very much like a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Even if your employer opened it for you and is making contributions, once they've made the contribution into the HSA, you're in total control of it. From a tax tool perspective, it's pretty much unrivaled. So it's pre-tax money in, like a traditional IRA. So when you make a contribution, you get a deduction for it in that tax year. The investment earnings are tax deferred, like all these accounts are. So profits come in, don't pay tax on them, get to redeploy those funds. And if you take it out, your distribution from an HSA, and there's a lot of ability to do that, it's also tax-free on the way out. So you literally never pay taxes on that money. And the money that the HSA makes while you're in there, you never pay tax on that money as long as you take qualified distributions. And it's a pretty easy thing to do. So if you have a high deductible health plan, you're not on Medicare, and you're not a dependent, do look into health savings accounts because they're a tremendous tax tool and they can do this type of investing.
Thank you.
Sure. The Roth IRA rules are this. So, and I do see that there's a comment in the chat here about HSA gains are taxed in California. Any investment strategy, so I'm giving you this in very broad strokes, but any investment strategy that you use may be subject to taxes in any local jurisdiction, right? But that really has as much to do with the investment strategy as the account type, right? So for instance, I know that a lot of folks who have investment real estate in Hawaii, and unlike some other states, they have to pay a special tax in Hawaii for that privilege. So that tax does get taken out of the HSA or IRA before you can consider what those gains are, right? So this is a great comment, and I appreciate that because I'm giving this to you in very broad strokes. So looking into the specifics is important. Okay, so back to the Roth. Roth IRAs do have a stipulation that you can't make a contribution to one. So if you don't have one, you couldn't open one because you can't make a contribution if you make over a certain amount of money, right? And so it's different if you're single, and it's different if you're single or if you are married filing jointly, right? So that's another thing to look into. And I honestly don't know what the numbers are right off the top of my head. I think if you file as a single person, that somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000, $130,000. And married filing jointly, I think is 180s, something like that. But there is a stipulation for contributions to a Roth where if you make too much money, then you're not allowed to contribute in that tax year. If you already have a Roth open, and this goes for all these account types, when you're doing a transfer or a rollover or even a conversion, those are not subject to the annual contribution limits, right? So any of those account types that I mentioned earlier have an annual contribution limit. So that's new money in that you can make in a given tax year. But a couple of things are not limited. One is earnings. So the earnings that you make in those accounts are not limited. They don't have anything to do with the annual contribution limit. Number two is transfers and rollovers are not limited. So if you've already made contributions to a traditional IRA for many years and you want to convert that to a Roth, you can. And if you have an old 401k that and this is a very common one, an old 401k or a couple of old 401ks, and you want to put them into a traditional IRA at a self-directed IRA firm so that you can go out and invest in real estate, those rollovers, again, not taxed, not penalized, they're also not limited by amount. You can roll over all that regardless of the amount. So contribution rules are very specific about new money in a given tax year.
So do I understand that if I make a married couple, I make $200,000 a year, let's say, and I don't have a Roth, but I have a traditional, I could roll that into a Roth?
You're still allowed to make a conversion, yeah.
I could convert my traditional into a Roth.
Right.
Even if I make too much money to open a new one. But it would be opening a new one, but I'm not contributing any
The
money
stipulation is really the contribution.
So I can't make a contribution, but I can roll the money into a Roth.
Convert it.
I can convert a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. I just can't contribute my $7,000.
Right. In that tax year. Now, if your finances change in later years and you're eligible to make a contribution, then you can.
Right. Yeah. Well, COVID opened that up for many people.
Indeed.
Oh.
Yeah, it really did. There's also a question in the chat here I want to cover real quick about HSAs. Talking about whether you need a guesstimate of the funds. So I want to make a distinction between HSAs, health savings account, and flex spending accounts, which is an FSA. They're different animals. They're both good tax tools, and they're both related to your healthcare costs. But unlike an FSA, flex savings account, where you have to make an estimate, put the money in, and it's use it or lose it, HSAs are not like that. If you're eligible to make a contribution, once you put that money in the HSA, it can persist through time, up to a year after your death, without you having, it's not use it or lose it. And so any money that you make as a contribution can continue to earn as long as you keep that money in there. So without getting too into the weeds on it, an HSA is different from an FSA, flex spending account, in that you don't make guesstimates and it's not use it or lose it.
Thank you.
Is there a cap on those health savings accounts, or can I put whatever I want in it?
Yes, health savings accounts also have an annual contribution limit, just like the other account types. And you know, it's a funny thing that the contribution limits have been going up over the last several years, certainly for HSAs, and less so, I would say, for traditionals and Roths. But SEPs and Simples and solo 401ks and things like that have all been, you know, kind of inching up as we go. And I will make one thing, just since we're talking about account types again. Solo 401ks are, if you're self-employed, so any of you out there who are self-employed, solo 401ks and SEP IRAs are account types that you might want to look into. And the reason is because you are considered to be an employer, even though it's just you. And so you can open those employer account types, and the annual contribution limits for those are much, much higher than the individual account types. So as I mentioned, traditional IRA, Roth IRA, and HSA are individual accounts. SEP, Simple, and solo 401ks, or 401ks in general, are employer accounts. And for SEP and individual 401ks in general, the annual contribution limit is northwards of 58,000, depending upon how old you are, per year. Whereas a traditional and a Roth is 6,000 if you're under 50 and 7,000 if you're over 50. So look again, and again, I don't want to get too deep into this, but if you are self-employed, looking into a SEP IRA or a solo 401k is worth your time, I think.
Clay,
and those could be self-directed IRAs also?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
Then Seema has a question.
and I want to come back after Seema and just kind of tie onto that because I have a question.
Okay.
I don't have a question. I was going to say, and it may be too complicated for this, but for people who are over the limit, the wage limit, you can do the backdoor Roth. And it took all of 2020 for Larissa, who, if you guys don't know, works at Advanta, and God bless her, the stuff she has to listen to explain to me. But it took her 1 year to convince me that it is totally legal to do a backdoor Roth. And then I started doing it for my girls, and I even opened it for myself at my ripe old age of 62. So that is one. Second, if you invest in real estate in your retirement program, you can be hit with UBIT. I'm still working on understanding that, but I know some people who just won't invest because it's better than to figure out later on if you're hit. But you obviously know because you do it. So whatever you do it in such a way that you won't be hit by it later. That's all.
So I'll thank you, Seema. It's nice to see you. A couple things to say about that. So Peggy, you were talking about the contributions to the Roth. If you make too much money, then, you know, how do you work that? Well, what Seema is pointing out is that there is no income limit for contributions to a traditional IRA, let's say. And so you can actually contribute to your traditional IRA and then the next week convert it to a Roth, right? And so, and especially if you're, this comes into play a lot with, and there were some COVID rules as well that allowed some interesting conversions and tax things, but it was pretty specific. So you'd want to look into it. But the general idea of a backdoor conversion is if you're unable to make contributions to a Roth, whatever account type you have, if it's the pre-tax variety, so a traditional IRA or most 401ks or a SEP or a simple, make the contributions to that account and then convert it. Now that's a taxable event. So understand this. Anytime you're making a conversion, there's a tax event because you're changing that money from pre-tax to post-tax. So whatever the gross amount of dollars or value that you are converting from traditional to Roth is going to be added to your income in the tax year of the conversion, right? So do understand it's not a freebie. You're just changing horses, thinking that tax strategy in the end will become more cost effective for you.
Yeah, so the Roth is after tax dollars anyway. So you're just doing it, you're just going through a different path to get there. Still paying the same taxes you would.
Right. And then the UBIT thing, so this is a great topic to look into. UBIT is unrelated business income tax. And it can occur usually in two different ways. One, if your IRA is invested in a real estate venture that is taking benefit from debt, so whether that is a syndication that is using debt, or your IRA buys a rental property, let's say using debt like mine did, then the net profit that's associated with the debt percentage may have some UBIT to it. And that means that the IRA itself will need to kick some tax off to the government before it consolidates its earnings, right? And I'll give you the quick and dirty on why that is that if your IRA goes out and buys a property and it borrows 70%, you only actually made contributions of the 30%. So the 30% gets the full tax benefit, right? But the 70% is other people's money. So the astounding thing from my perspective is that the IRS will let us have our IRAs make money on something that on borrowed money, right? So if you're familiar with debt and you like debt, you're comfortable with it, doing the cost analysis of using debt is a very powerful thing. That said, because that money that your IRA borrows, you never contributed to your IRA, even though you're still going to get the returns from it, that means that the net profit associated with that borrowed money, you might have to kick a little bit back to the government. The other way is if your IRA invests in an ongoing business that is not housed in a C corporation, the business tax part of that equation gets taken care of at the level of the IRA in the form of UBIT. And I introduced this topic, and I'm doing kind of a flyby again. It is something to look into if you're in either of those circumstances. It's actually not a penalty. It's a cost of doing business in a certain arrangement for your IRA. And so looking into it and making sure that you use that information as part of your cost analysis is an important thing when you're choosing a particular investment for your IRA.
Thank you. Cliff?
Well, I wanted to ask a question on that before I ask my original question. I had someone else bring up UBTI, and they said it's different than UBIT. Are you familiar with that?
It's a different word. So UBTI is actually the income. So again, without trying to go too far in the weeds, there are two types of income that may produce UBIT. UBIT is the tax, unrelated business income tax. UBTI is unrelated business taxable income, right? So UBTI is the money that's flowing in. And if it's if it qualifies, you may have to pay UBIT on that UBTI. So yes, it's a different term. It's a different thing. But UBTI may result in you having to pay UBIT. The other one is UDFI, unrelated debt financed income. So that's when your IRA is using debt. So that's the income. That's the money that's being produced by the debt financed portion of the investment. That's the income. And as a result of that income, you may not, but you may have to pay UBIT, which is the tax itself. So UBTI and UDFI are two streams of income. UBIT, UBIT is the tax itself.
Okay. So I'm gonna switch over to my original question. So you were talking about the solo 401ks in the past, and I had an investor who actually, it seemed that they were using the solo 401k as a container for a self-directed IRA, as well as a couple of Roth accounts that were in there. And if I'm understanding correctly from what you said earlier, does that gain them a larger amount that they can contribute to those? Is that why you would do that?
Well, I don't know that I understand the solo 401k housing an IRA. That's
I've never seen that before. It was the first time I'd ever seen it.
Yeah, that's actually not a thing. And to be fair, the vocabulary is tricky, right? So,
okay.
But you can't actually have an IRA inside a 401k, and you wouldn't want one. Now, you might have an LLC inside a 401k,
and
which is often known as checkbook control. So that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the structures that you can have inside an IRA or a 401k are myriad, right? You can't have LLCs inside of them for any number of reasons, liability protection, or organization, any kind of thing like that. So the IRA inside of one, that's not a thing, but the LLC thing is common. And did that cover your question, Cliff, or what? Did I miss something?
Kind of. I didn't know if maybe there was any advantage if you could house either one of those instruments inside of a solo 401k to increase your contributions that you can make.
Now, the contributions are always as a result of the account type.
Okay.
Now, there are other retirement accounts that in some cases can offer even more contributions than this. And again, I'm not a CPA or an enrolled agent, and I don't know those vehicles well. So this is a good thing for you to talk to your CPA or your attorney about. Okay. But when you're using one of these particular vehicles, 401k, SEP Simple IRA, traditional IRA, Roth IRA, HSA, they have a set limit. Now, solo 401ks, SEP, simple IRAs, traditional and Roth, and HSA all have something called a catch-up provision. So if you're over that age threshold, you get to, if you're a little older, you get to make higher contributions for that tax year. And the number is even different for HSAs. Instead of being 50 like it is for IRAs, it's 55 for HSAs. So you got to look into the specific account type. You can have multiple 401ks and traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs, and under certain circumstances, you may have multiple accounts out there, right? So if you have, I actually know a couple of guys who have two different disparate businesses. They don't affect each other, one or the other. So they have 401ks on each of them. And so that is one way to have more contributions. Now, any individual is going to eventually hit their personal deductible limit. I mean, the IRS is not going to let you deduct an infinite amount of money, but there's still ways to make more contributions under certain circumstances. So you might need to look into it.
Thank you. And before I yield to Nika, I just wanted to make sure that we don't miss Selena's question that she had in queue. So she was talking about a solo 401k and contributing to a mega Roth, many benefits over IRAs. So I just recently have read about mega Roths, but I had never heard of it prior to about 2 weeks ago when I read about it. So I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, Clay, and you can speak a little bit more and elaborate on.
Well, usually the mega Roth is a 401k that has a provision for taxed contributions over and above your tax deductible contributions. And the mega Roth idea, this is kind of goes back to SEMA's backdoor Roth thing. Oh boy. All right. So 401k plans are a little bit more variable than IRAs. They're not quite as standardized. So a 401k plan document will actually tell you have a certain features that they either have or they don't have. So some 401ks have a Roth provision, some do not. Some 401ks allow for a loan to the participant, some do not. Some allow for post-tax contributions, some do not. So the IRA, the idea for the mega Roth is to pick the 401k that allows for post-tax contributions and everything else, get as much money in there, and anything that you have to contribute that's pre-tax, you hope that that 401k also has a provision in it called an in-plan conversion, meaning again that you could make all your contributions. Some of the 401k contributions have to be pre-tax. The employer contributions have to be pre-tax, but some plan documents allow for you to convert those later into Roth format, all still within the same plan. So the plan document itself, choosing a plan if you're doing a solo 401k, choosing a plan document and understanding the features that you are choosing is important, because it may limit you or it may not, or may give you more opportunities down the line. But that's kind of what's going on with the mega Roth and that kind of thing. The catch-up contributions for solo 401ks or 401ks in general, if you're over 50, is I think it was $6,500 this tax year or something like that. It's an enormous amount of money. That's just the catch-up. So and I'm gonna ballpark this, and I apologize to you guys for not looking up the numbers prior to getting on this. But let's say the annual contribution limit is $58,000. It's not, it's higher than that. But that means that you get $6,500 over and above that if you're over 50 years old to make a contribution in that tax year. And then there's the post-tax contribution.